On this slide, I'm just giving you a summary of that minimum 4GL report application code that you will have recognized from our walking through that simple reporting application. So the first thing is you're always going to be defining your report handler. It's always going to be an om.SaxDocumentHandler. This handler is used throughout the report. When it comes time to actually load in the current settings from the report design, we call the FGL report load current settings, and we specify the 4RP file that we want to pass in. It's going to return a Boolean whether or not the load was successful. The next three I have listed up here, we didn't have in our minimum default application that we walked through. However, they're things that are commonly used. So one of the things is when you're producing the report, what device do you want it to be put out to? Do you want it to go to a printer? Do you want it to go to a PDF file? Do you want it to go to SVG, which is our report viewer? Do you want it to go to an image? So you can select the device where it's going to be output to. You can either set preview mode or you can have it saved to disk. So if select preview is true, it's going to show it up on the screen. If it's at defaults, it can save it to disk. And finally, if you are creating a file, you can have the FGL report set output file name where you specify the name of the file. When you do specify any of these three reporting APIs, they come after you load the current settings. So you load the current settings from the report definition file, and they have to occur before you commit the current settings, because when you commit it, that's what the report engine is going to use. So after we load the current settings, after we make any changes to how we want it to be output, we can then let our handler variable equal to FGL report commit current settings. This commits the current settings, and it's these settings that are going to be used by our Genero report engine. We can then start our report. We give the report block name to our XML handler, and we give the handler name. So as we stated in the previous slide, the only mandatory functions that we have is the FGL report load current settings, and that's going to set the report settings according to the 4RP file you pass in, and it'll return a Boolean. The other is the FGL report commit current settings. When you execute this, it's going to configure the report engine, and it's going to return an om.SaxDocumentHandler. So from a code perspective, if the FGL report load current settings pass in the file name, then you want to let the handler equal to FGL report commit current settings. Otherwise, you're going to exit the program. Now looking at each of these mandatory reporting API functions, the first one was our FGL report load current settings. We said that you pass in a 4RP file and that it returns a Boolean. Now this is going to cause the report to lay out according to the layout of the report as defined in the 4RP file. The 4RP file can include defaults for settings such as the paper size. However, you can always override these by using the FGL report functions relating to paper size and by calling those after you have the FGL report load current settings. If you pass in null, it's going to use the ASCII layout implied by the report statement. So if instead of doing a 4RP file you pass in null, it's going to use the report block to define how the report is laid out. And it's mandatory that we call the load current settings before we try to commit current settings. There is a function out there that combines both the load current settings and the commit current settings. And that's the FGL report load and commit. So it's a wrapper of the load and the commit. And you can use this if no other changes are required between the load and the commit. So if you're not going to change the output, if you're not going to change the preview mode, if you're not going to specify the file name, you just want to use whatever is set up by default or set up in the 4RP file, you can use this load and commit. When it comes time to output the report to Genero Report Writer, we're outputting an XML document. So our SaxDocumentHandler class is providing the interface to write an XML filter following the Sax standards. So before we get ready to send it across, various FGL report functions are going to configure the behavior of our XML figure. We do our FGL report commit current settings to pass them to the XML filter, and it returns a pointer to this XML filter. But then the new one we're introducing, or we're talking about now, is the start report name, report block, to the XML handler and passing in our handler variable. So instead of the report being sent to a file, a pipe, a printer, or a screen, It is instead turned into an XML document and processed by an XML filter. So back when I was showing you the example of creating a report application using the wizard, one of the things I did was create an RDD file. Now the RDD file is a file that's needed by the report designer to specify what fields it can expect to retrieve across and what order by clauses have been set up so that it knows when a change happens in data objects, such as a change in the store or a change in the order number. And to create this RDD file, there's two ways we can do it. From the command line, I can just do an FGL comp --build -RDD and specify the name of the 4GL file that holds my report driver. Alternatively, from within Studio, as I showed you, I can identify that 4GL file that has my report driver, and I add the --build -RDD to the compiler option. Now, every time that 4GL file is compiled, it will go ahead and recreate that RDD file. So we know that our RDD file will never be out of date. For every time we compile the application, the RDD file will be recreated.